Hey guys, it's me. Welcome to Plato's Cave and the Theory of the Forms. So grab a nice cup of tea and get ready for a quick tutorial. We're going to be looking at the allegory of the cave, and we're going to show how the prisoners, the fire, the puppeteers, and everything fits into the allegory and the theory of the forms. But first, let's kind of examine each thing individually. So first, we have the prisoners here, these two, and we're going to suppose that, as Socrates says to Glaucon in Book 7 of the Republic, that each one has been bound by the neck and ankles and arms so that they can only look forwards towards the wall, and they're not able to look behind them. So there's two of them, and they're able to talk to each other. And now we're going to look back to the back of the wall, and we're going to see that there's a fire here. And the fire here represents the light that casts the shadows onto the wall in front of the prisoners. Then below the fire, in between the prisoners, there's puppeteers who walk across a walkway. And these puppeteers hold up statues of physical objects that are the shadows. They cast shadows onto the wall for the prisoners to see. And as these puppeteers hold up the shadows, or hold up the physical objects rather, they make noises that go along with the shadows, or with the objects. So, for example, if it was a bird, they would make bird noises, and if it was a tree, as you can see beside the bird, they would make rustling noises. And then we have an arrow here that points to the wall that the prisoners are looking at, and they cast the shadow of the bird and the tree, or whatever objects they're holding up. Okay, and now that we're back, so now that we understand how the images here cast shadows onto the wall for the prisoners, it's evident that these prisoners, since they've been there since birth, these shadows and sounds are the only reality that they know. So now that the prisoners have been there for their whole lives, they begin to play games where they'll guess which shadow will come next in the sequence, and they'll guess which sound will accompany it. Now we're going to suppose that one of the prisoners escapes from his chains, and he's forced outside, or at least so he can turn around. He's forced to look at the fire, I'll say first. Now, since he's been in the dark his whole life, the prisoner isn't going to want to look at the fire, and he instantly wants to return down to the cave. So the light of the fire first burns his eyes, but eventually he gets used to it, and then he notices that, oh wait, my reality isn't actually shadows, it's just caused by these puppeteers. And he questions his life. So then he's dragged outside the cave. So he goes all the way out, and we'll say that there's an exit over here. And again, so he's finally outside into the real world now, where the sun is. So now we go outside, and the prisoner is outside, and the light from the sun is too much to bear, so it's burning his eyes, and he can't really see anything because all he's ever known is inside the cave. But eventually he's able to look over, and he can see the true objects, the tree itself, the sun itself, and the other animals, if there are any here. He can see the reflections in the water. That's the first step. So eventually he gets used to seeing the reflections, which is the third step in the first step in the intelligible world, and the third step, which is thought. And then finally, once he's able to see the actual tree itself and the sun itself, the true forms, that represents understanding for Plato. Those are the birds, those are the real animals, and then he realizes that the objects inside the cave are not actually reality, they're only illusions, and he's been deceived his whole life. So now once he sees the sun represents full understanding, and it represents the first principle of all things. So now let's get into the theory of forms. Alright guys, so thanks for partaking in my little drawing. Now we're going to talk about the theory of forms and get down to the heart of the matter. So, now that the cave dweller has come outside, he's seen the sun, he recognizes that the sun is actually the true form, And it stands for the truth, and in turn, the truth stands for understanding, and the sun is the first principle of everything. So, the cave dwellers inside the cave represent us as people who are living in the material world or the sensible world. So, the cave is the sensible world, whereas the real world outside of the cave is the intelligible world. And the issue here is that the material world which we live in is less real than the intelligible world because the material world is in constant flux, whereas the intelligible world is the world of forms, and this is a big idea for Plato. So now let's get into the notion about how forms differentiate from particulars. Alright guys, so let's analyze the cave now in relation to the theory of the forms, and let's see what Plato really wants us to understand from this. So basically what he's saying is that the intelligible world can only be grasped through reason or intellect alone, and not through our senses. And the intelligible world is the world of the forms, which are comprised of true forms that are abstract and changeless. So basically he's saying that everything outside of the cave is true and everything inside of the cave is just a mere illusion. Now, the way Plato says that we have a connection with the intelligible world is through the fact that before we're born, our souls are scattered around, and they're tied to the world of the forms before they're tied to our body. So through our soul is the only way that we can actually understand what the intelligible world is. Okay, so now that we understand that we live in a world that is constantly changing and that there is a world of the forms, let's look at some particulars. So here I have 2 apples, and the thing about these apples is that these apples come and go. They're particulars that share in the form of appleness. This one's rotting, this one is not rotting, but we both know that they're still apples. Now the thing about these is that if I put these down, or if I throw them away, the idea of apple is still there. Therefore, the real world, the world of the forms, is eternal and unchanging. And the problem is that we live in a material world where we have to rely on our senses, and things around us are in constant flux. Now that we're able to understand how the theory of the form works and what Plato really means by it, and how the cave relates to it, we can see that through the soul we actually have an understanding of the forms because it was connected to the intelligible world before it was tied to our body. And Plato really wants to make note that the intelligible world is the world of the philosopher because the philosopher is not held captive to the world of the shadows inside the cave. Thanks.